Let's talk gauges for your first generation F-body car. GTO, a lot of the General Motors of this time period, heck, the other manufacturers probably work on the same premise, that the gauges use a searching for ground system where basically you got a wire coming out of the cluster, going to the fuel tank, oil pressure sending unit, temperature sending unit. And what it's looking for is a path to ground. And the change of that resistance changes what the gauge reads it. So there's an easy way to test these without having to have a meter or go off the deep end and get you a good way, which way you need to go for repair at home without spending a whole lot of money or beating your head against the wall and determine what it needs. Now this car here, we did the rally gauge upgrade. Ooh, hooray, it was cool, except for the oil pressure gauge reads a big fat 0 with the engine running. So that tells you either we got a faulty gauge wiring or something, or the engine truly doesn't have oil pressure. I don't believe it's that. It's actually the first one. The engine has great oil pressure, but I want the gauge to represent what's happening. And that's what we're going to get into today. Diagnosing these gauges, and this is going to hold true to all of this. So you can apply it to the fuel gauge, oil gauge, temperature gauge, and use the same technique for testing it and looking into it. But this one, though, for this, I guess, demonstration purposes, we're going to dig into the oil pressure gauge. So working down our final list here, we're going to do oil pressure gauge repair. Now, I'll show you what's happening here. Of course, now we'll climb around here to the car. That looks absolutely fantastic. We'll get inside here. In case you guys didn't see the previous video, it's your first time stopping by, this is what we're going with here. Fuel gauge, temp gauge, oil pressure gauge. I'm gonna get my foot here so I can hit the loud pedal. Set the choke, and we should fire this thing up. Now the fuel gauge, yeah, it reads about what it has, next to nothing. Temperature gauge is stone cold, but see how the oil pressure gauge reads 0? Start it up. Still reads 0. That is not good. So that's what we're going to try to figure out here today. And the first thing we're going to do, now basically, underneath the hood, there's an oil pressure sending unit. Basically, I cut a hole right there in the toe board. I'll be right there, right on where I need to be. We're going to take the wire off of the oil pressure sending unit. Right now, the gauge reads 0, so that means it has 0 ohms resistance. If I unplug it, that's infinite resistance, over 100 ohms. That gauge should go bam, swing around this way. If it does, the gauge and the wiring to the setting unit is probably fine, but if it stays here, we have a wiring problem or a gauge issue. So let me get the hood opened up, unplug it, and we'll turn that key back on and see what that thing does. Now in our Pontiac engine, down here is our setting unit down by the exhaust manifold, little gold thing here. I'm just gonna reach down here, literally just unplug it. Here's our wire. I can kind of put this up off to the side. I don't need to start the car. All I need to do now is turn that key on, and that'll tell me a whole lot of the story. And watch that gauge now. I'm gonna turn the key on. I bet you it pegs the other direction. Yeah, it disappeared. So I'm gonna tell you right now, my gauge is probably fine. I have a faulty setting unit. It really is just that easy. Now the opposite I could do, let's just say the gauge is pegged down this way, like it is right now. I could take that same wire. Actually, let's go ahead and do that. Take that same wire and find a place to ground it out to a good ground. And that should be 0 ohms of resistance. And that gauge should peg back to 0. That way, in case maybe yours just broke the opposite direction, it's stuck high. So we'll pull this thing out. Let me go grab a chunk of wire. All right, here's what I've done. I stabbed the wire into the spade terminal. Here's probably the best ground in the entire vehicle, right here at the battery. And I should go turn the key on and have the exact opposite result. That thing should go to 0. I'll probably just reach in here from the side. See if I can't make it happen. Now we'll see if that oil pressure gauge comes back up and around where you can actually see it, I hope. There you go, 0. So again, that there is testing our wiring from the sending unit all the way in here to the gauge. Since the gauge reads like it's supposed to, 0 ohms and high at infinite ohms, I'm gonna tell you right now, I have a faulty sending unit. So I'm gonna work on getting my hand down in there and see if I can't get that thing undone and unscrewed. And here's the thing about it. I actually have one right here. I already did a little test on it, but I want to show you how I got there. But we're going to put this in there and see if we can get operational oil pressure gauge. Okay, just as easy as that. Look at that, brandy, the shiny new sending unit. So we'll go ahead and undo our little jump wire, plug the new one in there, and see if we have different results. And I think will be operational. Okay. Well, let's see what happens. Now, I suspect somewhere 20, 30 PSI. I don't know. But this time we actually have to start it. And we should go from nothing to something, I hope. Hey, look at that. So, bad sanding unit. Confirmed. Now, the same thing holds true like to the fuel gauge. You have your buddy back here in the back. I'll actually show you here. There's a tan wire in the trunk. If you unplug it, you can watch that gauge go from whatever it is, unplug should peg full. Then you can actually ground that out, and then it should go to empty. That way you can test your gauge. And the temperature gauge is under the hood here. It's the green wire. Let me show you. All right, now when it comes to the temperature gauge, I'll show you where it's at. Right down here. This is the green wire here. That wire there, it's a little bit different. If you unplug it, infinite resistance, the gauge actually reads colder. It goes to a lesser amount. Then if you were to ground it out, it would read pegged hot. So that's just a little something to keep in mind. But it still does the same idea. You can still operate the wiring, operate the fuel temperature gauge, and make sure it's good. And I'm going to show you right here, right quick, where that tan wire is for the fuel sending unit. I'll get the right key here. I do this all the time. All right, there we go. Now, inside the trunk, back here, there's the tan wire. Obviously, one's license plate light. Tan wire is for your fuel gauge. Unplug it, should peg full. Touch it to ground, should read empty. I want to show you where those are at. And for those of us who like to use a volt ohm meter to do your testing on your electrical problems or concerns, I'm going to tell you a little something. Oil pressure sending unit operates from 0 ohms to 90 ohms, depending on pressure. 0 ohms, 0 psi, and then up. Fuel gauge sending unit, 0 ohms is empty tank. 100 ohms is full tank of fuel, so that's your operating range in case you want to grab your meter and do some testing on it that way. And water temp sensor, I have no idea. I never bothered to test it. I've never had too many issues with those, but I know it has, like I just showed you, infinite resistance, pegs cold. The more the resistance, the hotter it gets. So, or sorry, said that backwards. Unplugged is infinite resistance, reads cold, and less resistance, read hot. I can't believe I said that because it's probably 95 degrees. You can see that I'm sweating, which is not normal. It's Indiana, and we're in the middle of some kind of a heat wave, so I'm getting a little delusional maybe. But nonetheless, you can see the Great Pumpkin has come a long way. If you've never seen this car before, is this your first time stopping by? Thank you for that. This car didn't look like this a year and a half ago. It was a car that had 100,000 miles of, a lot of fun, maybe a little bit of abuse, but rust, corrosion, and tiredness. Now, doesn't look like that whatsoever. We've gone through every system, ironing out all the little details like the oil pressure gauge. I wanted that operational. Simple, easy fix, and now you know how to test them yourself just the same. We've got a few more videos, a few little things, odds and ends to tie up, and this car is going to be done. If you guys have seen it from the beginning, you know what we started with, and this thing is a heck of an improvement and had a lot of fun putting it back together and sharing the story with you. So anyway, nonetheless, I want to wrap this thing up. We've got a few more things yet to go. Carpet, center console, seat belts, A-pillar trim, and probably a couple little things that I just haven't remembered to see or whatever. We'll do a shakedown, do a big walk around, and do a final checklist. So nonetheless, I've rambled on enough. Grab the camera, work on some more of that list, get this car done, and I hope to see you guys then.